So in today's video, we're going to be going over the 20th LeetCode problem, valid parens. Let's start off by reading the problem. Problem states, given a string with only characters that are either open or close parentheses, which could be of different type of course, determine if the parentheses are valid. So suppose we have a string that looks like this. We know that this string contains valid parentheses because each open parenthesis contains a valid closing parenthesis. Let's take a look at this example. So here we know that the parentheses are not valid because we don't have a match for this open bracket. So let's take a look at another example. Suppose we have a string that starts off with an open curly and then an open bracket and then a close curly and a close bracket. Now we know that this string is also not a valid parentheses string because when we take a look, we don't have a valid closing parenthesis for this curly bracket. So the only way to determine, or the only way to know that a string has valid parentheses is if all the parentheses are matching, such as in this case. Cool. So now let's take a look at an algorithm that can solve this problem for us. So suppose we're given a string that looks like this. How can we solve this problem? How can we check that it has the valid parentheses, right? All right, so what we want to do is have a stack. So what we're going to do with the string is we're going to iterate through the string, character by character. And as we're iterating through the string, if we see an open parenthesis, and we know that there's three types of open parentheses. There's a curly, open bracket, and an open paren. So if we see any of these types of characters in our string, we're going to add them to our stack. So in this case, as we're iterating through the stack, we would add the open curly, then we would add the open bracket, and then we would add the open paren. And then, as if we ever see something that is not one of these, then we're going to pop from the stack. We're going to pop the first element from the stack. And when we pop, we're going to check if the element at the current index, which in this case is right over here, 0, 1, 2, 3, at index 3, matches with the parenthesis that has just been popped, right? In this case, the value at index 3 is this closed parenthesis, and of course it matches with the open parenthesis, so we can move forward to the next index. So now we know that our initial item has been popped off from the stack, so our stack will look like this. And of course, now the index will be 4, and we will move on to this bracket. And of course, we're going to check if the bracket matches with the closed bracket. And of course it does. So now that we pop this off, we're going to be in our final iteration of the loop. And we're going to pop this item off because we know that in the final index, which is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in the fifth index, we see a closing curly, sorry. And if we see a closing curly, then we know we have to pop an item from our stack. And then we're going to notice that, of course, this is a match, and we're going to return true at the end. So I do want to mention that there are a few special cases that we will need to consider because this program does not consider all of them, but I will go through that in the code because I think it's more clear if we see exactly the different types of special cases that we will need to worry about. But this, adding a stack iterating through the string one by one, putting them onto the stack if it's open, and popping them off if it is closed is going to be the general algorithm that we're going to be using to solve this problem. Cool. So now let's take a look at the big O notation. So again, if we have a string that's like this, right? We're going to have to iterate through the entire string, no matter what. So we know that the time complexity instantly is going to be O of n, because the length of a string can be, of size n. The worst case space complexity is also going to be O of n. That's because we know that we have a stack, and we're going to have to keep track of all the open parentheses. And now if the string was formatted incorrectly, right, or if the string, I suppose, was not valid, right, we can have a bunch of open brackets and open curlies. And of course, the size of that is also going to be n. So in this case, the space complexity in the worst case is also going to be big O of n. Cool. Now that we went through the big O complexity as well as the algorithm, we can look at the code and see what's going on in there. Alright, so now let's go over the code. We have a function called isValid, and that's going to be the main function that checks whether a given string has valid parentheses or not. So let's see how it starts off. So at first, we want to initialize a list called passParens, which is of course empty. And this is the list that we're going to be using to check our parentheses. This list is going to be used as a stack, and we're going to be popping off items from this list one by one, making sure that if we see a closed parenthesis, that we have a matching open parenthesis. So let's see how we use this passParens. So inside, after declaring passParens, we have to iterate through the string, right? So when we're iterating through the string, what we want to do is check if the current value at the string, which is s of I, is an open parenthesis. So if it's an open parenthesis, we know that we want to append it to the passParentheses list, or stack in this case. Just so you guys understand, isOpen, the function is declared here, and all it does is it checks if the current character is an open parenthesis of any of these kinds. So you have open paren, you have open curly bracket, and you have open bracket. Cool. So as we're going through the loop, we want to make sure that if it's an open parenthesis, that we append it to our stack of past parentheses. Now suppose it is not an open parenthesis and it is a closed parenthesis. Then we want to enter this else statement. Now in this else statement, the first thing we want to do is make sure that the past parentheses stack is not empty. Because if it's empty, that means that there exists an extra closing parenthesis. It doesn't matter which type of parenthesis it is, but there's an extra one. And in that case, we know that it's not a valid string with valid parentheses. So we can return false. Now afterwards, we know we still have to make another check. So in this check, we're going to pop off the open parenthesis. So pops off the last item that you just inserted into the list. And of course, this closing parenthesis that we care about is going to be the current item in the string. And then we're just going to pass this into paren is same type method, which basically checks if the open and closing brackets are matching. And of course, if they are not matching, we will return false. And real quickly, here is the paren is same type method. All we're doing is checking if the brackets or curly brackets or open parentheses are matching. And if they do, we return true. Otherwise, we just return false. So this for loop is going to go through the entire string and make sure that all the parentheses are valid. Now there is one final check that we need to make right before we return, right? it's possible that there are more open brackets than closed brackets, right? So that would mean that past parens is not going to be empty. And that is an invalid string in this case. So the last check that we're going to do is make sure that the length of past parameters is equal to 0. And that will make sure that the string that was passed in has valid parentheses. So let's take a look at two small examples. So the basic one, in the basic example, here we know that these parentheses are valid, so it's going to return true. And in this one, we see that the parentheses are not valid, so it returns false. So let's go through the first example, right? In the first iteration, we have past parentheses is none. And of course, we're going to keep appending parentheses into the loop. So after the third iteration of this loop, what we're going to see is that parentheses, which is a list, is going to have open curly, and then an open bracket, and a open. So that's what past params is going to look like. Past parens, sorry. So that's what past parens is going to look like. After reaching index 3, we're going to be hitting the else statement. And we know that past parens is not true, so we're going to pop off the first in the list. So in this case, this thing over here, which is this, and close parenthesis is going to equal the close parenthesis. And then, of course, that's going to be valid, and we're going to iterate to the next section of the loop. And this time, when we pop from parens, we know that this is not here anymore. So we're going to pop this item, which is the open bracket, and we're going to check that with this, which is of course true. And in the last iteration, both of these items will not be in past parens. So this pop this item from past parens and compare that with this item. And of course that's true. And finally, once we iterate through the entire for loop, we're going to make sure that past parens is equal to 0, or the length of past parens is equal to 0, which of course it is because we popped off the last item. And of course, this example is pretty straightforward. So, yeah. Cool, and if you guys enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like and subscribe for more content in the future. I post regularly on Monday, so on Monday mornings, every Monday morning I should be posting a video unless I am very busy that week or something, but I've been consistent for a while, so I think it's fine. Cool, thanks for watching. See you next time.